I need to tell you something I've never said publicly. For my entire career, I told myself I wasn't afraid of any pitcher alive. That was the story I carried into every at-bat, every stadium, every October. And for most of my life, it was true enough to believe. Then I stepped into a batter's box in Anaheim in the summer of 1974, and a man from Alvin, Texas, looked straight through me, not at me, through me. And I understood for the first time what it felt like to be on the wrong end of something you cannot prepare for.
Breaking ball, and that's it. Strikeout number 4,000 for Nolan Ryan.
You want to understand Nolan Ryan? You have to understand where he came from. Not the California Angels, not the New York Mets, Alvin, Texas, a town so small it barely earns a dot on a map. His father ran cattle. The land was flat and dry and unforgiving. There were no pitching coaches in Alvin, no radar guns, no video sessions, no scouts watching from behind a chain link fence. There was a boy, a baseball, and a wall. Ryan used to throw against the wall of the cattle barn on his family's property. Not a backstop, not a catcher, a barn wall. The surface was uneven. The distance wasn't regulation. Nobody told him where to aim, how to grip, when to release. He figured it out alone in the Texas heat, day after day, until his arm knew things his mind didn't have words for. That's where the fastball came from. Not from instruction, from repetition in silence. When the Mets drafted him in 1965, they didn't know what they had. Nobody did. They saw a hard-throwing kid with control problems, and they used him accordingly, spare parts, middle relief, plugging gaps. The organization's pitching staff was built around Tom Seaver, as it should have been. Ryan was inventory. The people making decisions in New York looked at his walk totals and shrugged. Numbers like that, you move on. I think about that decision a lot. Not because it was stupid, it wasn't. It was reasonable. Walk rates matter. Command matters. A pitcher who can't find the strike zone consistently loads bases, runs up pitch counts, asks his defense to bail him out inning after inning. The logic was sound. The problem was that the logic was measuring the wrong man. Ryan's walks were not a symptom of weakness. They were a side effect of something the Mets had no category for a fastball so far outside normal parameters that even Ryan himself hadn't fully learned to aim it yet. The command would come. What you can't manufacture, what no coaching staff can install, was already there from day one in Alvin. What they didn't count was the other number, the number of hitters who walked back to the dugout and said absolutely nothing, because there was nothing to say. When the Mets traded Ryan to the California Angels after the 1971 season, the New York press treated it like a reasonable baseball transaction. Jim Fregosi was a name player, an established infielder, a known quantity. Ryan was potential that hadn't fully arrived. The numbers supported the narrative. His ERA was inconsistent. His walks were a problem. The analytics of the era, such as they were pointed one direction. What the numbers couldn't measure was what happened in the dugout between innings. I've talked to hitters from that period. Not on the record, not for a book, just men who played through the 1970s, sitting around after the game, honest in the way ball players only get when they stop performing for the press. And when Ryan's name came up, the conversation changed. It didn't become statistical. It became physical. Men rubbed their hands together without realizing they were doing it. Pitchers who gave up home runs to me, shortstops who'd watched me hit 3 in a World Series. These men talked about Nolan Ryan the way you talk about a force of nature. Not something you beat, something you survive. Nobody in a front office was measuring that. Nobody had a column in the ledger for hitters who abbreviated their swings to protect their hands. Nobody tracked the at-bats where a man with a 290 average suddenly swung at a pitch 6 inches outside because anything was better than letting that fastball in. That data didn't exist, but it was real. Here's what else was real. Ryan's strikeout totals kept climbing year after year in Anaheim. And the conversation in the press stayed almost entirely about his walks, his potential, whether he'd ever put it all together. The framing never shifted. A man was quietly assembling one of the most dominant careers in baseball history, and the people paid to evaluate it were still using 1,969 criteria. The hitters knew, the hitters always knew, the men with the bats in their hands had a more accurate read on Nolan Ryan than anyone sitting in a press box or a general manager's office. In Ryan's case, the gap between what hitters understood and what the establishment believed was wider than I've seen for any player in my generation. It was a Tuesday night in Anaheim, mid-July, mid-season, the kind of game that doesn't make the highlight reels. Oakland was up by 2 runs. I had doubled off Ryan in the second inning, a real double, hit it well, felt good about it. When you get a hit off a great pitcher, you carry that confidence into your next at bat. That's how it works. You tell yourself you've solved him. I stepped in for the 3rd time around the 6th inning, set my feet, got comfortable in the box, looked out at the mound. Ryan wasn't looking at his catcher. He was looking at me. Just standing there on the rubber ball in his glove, looking directly at my face, not at my hands, not at my stance, at my face. Most pitchers, they're going through their process, reading signs, thinking location, thinking sequence. Ryan was doing none of that. He already knew what he was throwing. He just wanted me to know he knew. 3 seconds, maybe less. Then he went into his windup. I flinched before the ball was halfway to the plate. I have never told anyone that. Not my teammates, not the press, not anyone. But it's the truth. For the first time in my professional life, my body moved before my brain decided to move it. That's not a mechanical flaw. That's not a timing issue you fix in the cage. That's your nervous system telling you something your pride refuses to accept. I swung through a fastball that wasn't even close to the strike zone. People ask me sometimes, what made Ryan different from other hard throwers? Bob Gibson threw hard, Sam McDowell threw hard. There were arms in that era that hit triple digits on a good day. So why was Ryan singular? I can answer that question because of who I am. I know what it means to walk into a stadium and make 50,000 people nervous. I know what it means to stand at the plate in the bottom of the 9th in a World Series game and feel the weight of the moment trying to push you backward and refuse to be pushed. I've spent my career manufacturing that feeling from the other side. So I recognized it immediately when I was the one feeling it. Ryan didn't just throw hard. Ryan made the at-bat feel like a confrontation you might lose in a way that had nothing to do with a hit or an out. He brought something into the batter's box that didn't belong there. Something that made the strike zone feel smaller, the count feel heavier, your hands feel like they were responding half a beat too slow. I went home that night and sat alone for a while, not because I'd gone hitless. I'd been hitless before. I sat alone because I just met the one pitcher in my career who made me not want to win the confrontation, who made me just want to get through it. That was new. That was Ryan. It was the 1,977 All-Star game. We were both in the American League at that point, cordial enough, the way opponents become cordial when you've faced each other enough times that the competition becomes something almost like respect. We were standing near the batting cage before the home run derby events, not really talking, just occupying the same space. And Ryan turned to me completely unprompted and said, I'm going to give you his exact words because I've thought about them 100 times since. I'm not trying to strike you out, Reggie. I'm trying to make you not want to swing. That was it. He didn't wait for a response. He walked away. I've thought about that sentence for years. Most pitchers talk about the craft of pitching in terms of location, movement, sequence, the mechanical language of a trade learned over decades. Even the great ones, when they let you in, talk about setting up the fastball with the breaking ball, working the corners, reading a hitter's weight distribution. It's a complex language, but it's still a language about outcomes, about getting outs. Ryan wasn't talking about getting outs. He was talking about something that happens before the pitch, something that lives in the hitter's mind, in the hitter's hands, in the half second before the decision to swing. He was talking about defeating you before the ball left his hand. I've faced Greg Maddux, I faced Steve Carlton, I faced men who treated pitching like a chess match, who talked about setting up hitters, working counts, changing eye levels. Not one of them ever said anything like that, because not one of them meant it the way Ryan meant it. I was in the clubhouse when it happened, the 26th of September, 1981. Ryan was pitching for the Houston Astros against the Montreal Expos, and he needed one strikeout to pass Walter Johnson and become the all-time leader in baseball history. Someone had the television on. A few of us drifted toward it without quite deciding to. The room got quiet the way rooms get quiet when they know something is about to matter. He got the strikeout. Brad Mills. A swing and a miss that looked like 1,000 other swings and misses Ryan had collected over 15 years in the big leagues. Nobody in the clubhouse said anything for a few seconds. I thought about Alvin. I thought about a barn wall in Texas and a kid with no coach and no catcher and nothing except an arm and an obsession that nobody around him could fully understand. I thought about 1971 and the trade and the men in New York who looked at a ledger and made a reasonable decision. And I thought about every hitter in every at-bat in every stadium across 20 years who walked back to the dugout already knowing what the record books were, only now catching up to. I didn't cheer, I didn't shake my head. I just watched the camera cut to Ryan on the mound, and I watched his face, that same face he'd pointed at me in Anaheim 7 years earlier, and I understood that everything between us, every at-bat, every strikeout, every time my hands moved before my brain gave permission, had been a small piece of something much larger than either of us. I nodded at the screen. That was all I had. People will tell you Nolan Ryan is the greatest strikeout pitcher in baseball history. They'll cite the 5,714. They'll mention the 7 no-hitters, the number that stands so far above the record books, it barely looks like a baseball statistic. They'll point to the 4 decades, the longevity that defied everything we thought we knew about pitchers' arms and careers in the human body. All of that is true. But the men who stood in the batter's box against him, the men who were good enough to be there, who had earned the right to face the best pitching in the world, they remember something the numbers don't capture. They remember what it felt like when he looked at you before the pitch. They remember the half second where their training deserted them and their body made a decision their pride never authorized. That's the real record, not 5,714. The number of times a man who was not afraid of anything alive stepped into a rectangle of dirt and discovered for 3 or 4 pitches what it felt like to be wrong about himself. I was one of those men. I'm not embarrassed to say it. The fear doesn't lie.